Not a giant, but that was so cool. You got to watch him come flying up and pop that. Doing something that I actually don't do all that often, and that is pitch shiners and jigs for spring walleyes. Usually I'm a big artificial only type guy. Maybe in the fall I'll rig some chubs or something, but sometimes there's just something special about that early season pitching shiners on jigs or little hair jigs. Like this is an 1/8 ounce VMC bucktail, and especially if it's a day where it goes from sunny and 75 to freaking about to bust the gloves out cold. Wind did a 180, everything changed up and the fish slowed way down, so we're busting out the candy, catching some walleyes, and it's also just fun sometimes to whack a bunch of fish on a shiner. See the mood of this one. There he's turning, he's following it. I'm gonna try just giving it a little pop. There he bit. That was kind of cool. Just playing around with different cadences, just like you would with plastics, where he was following it and just kind of gliding behind it. And then when I actually did like a pop, not a big pop, I mean it's cold water, just a little 1 foot pop and let it drop down to bottom. Donk. Right into snoot, baby. Hey, give me that back. Those are $1 a piece. Where'd that go? He's pretty torn up. We'll donate that one to the fish gods. All right. One of the nice things about, I mean, you can throw any jig, but I do like throwing something with a little hair on there, because if you lose your bait, let's say you get a short bite and miss it, they'll still hit that hair jig. And also in colder water, like the VMC bucktail's got a little more hair in it, so it fishes really slow, which in cold water is usually important. Later in the year, once I ditch the minnow and I switch over to like that moontail design that's got thinner hair and fishes faster, kind of like how you snap jig plastics, but right now when water temps are in the 50s, I want it to fish about as slow as possible. Oh, here she comes, man. Here she comes. There we go. That one bit when I was just hanging that thing in the column, not really doing anything, which, oh, this one's got a little bit of yuck nose going on. Oh, but yeah, that one I was just hanging that jig in the column. And you can absolutely tie on about any size jig and shiner and catch fish. But if you really want to dial it in, you got to play with different weights. And I explain it almost like when you're fishing rivers in the spring and you want to use the lightest jig you can get away with. It's just as important on a lake. Right now I'm using an 1/8 of an ounce, shallow, mostly less than 10 feet of water. But it's pretty ripping. It's kind of hard with an 1/8, but it's as light as I can still fish. And what that does is it lets that shiner do the work. And you can hang it in the column. The wind will be putting a little bit of a bow in your line, and that bait is just hanging in the column above their nose. There's no way I could fish with a 16th today, but some days when it's glass calm, there's no wind, and you're up in that like 4 to 7 foot of water, you do a 16th ounce jig with a shiner, and you're just basically letting that shiner swim around. If you're fishing out a little deeper, 14 to 20 foot, I like to start with about a 1/4 ounce jig, but just always using the lightest one that you can get away with. Still feel that you're fishing near bottom, but not dragging. You're gonna get a lot more bites. Hello, shinies. I also really like that this is a small jig, but it's got a big hook gap. There's so many jigs where once you go from that quarter and you get down into an eighth or smaller, that gap gets to be about a crappie size and you miss so many fish. But having that bigger hook on there makes all the difference in the world. So we're just fishing a big flat, big like shallow kind of spawning flat. But it's got a little bit of everything on it. There's rocks on it, there's weeds, there's sand. And if you can ever find all three of those components mixed into the same area, especially if you can find like the spot on the spot that has where all three meet, a lot of times fish will just be absolutely loaded there. But the biggest feeding flats on the lake just hold the most fish. So that's your best bet. I mean, you can absolutely pull up to a little small flat or whatever and catch fish on it. But if you find one that's half-mile long, quarter-mile long, you know, just that biggest piece of structure on the lake is gonna just hold more walleyes, more bait, and more opportunity for bites. So right now, it's ripping out here probably more than it looks like. And what I wanna do is keep the nose of the boat pointed at where I wanna cast. And that's because with the wind putting that big bow in your line, if you're casting straight with that wind, you can keep it tight versus having that big bow like the fly fishermen having to mend their line and stuff. And it's just so much easier to feel what you got going on and get good casts. The same would be true for going right out the back of the boat. But if you're trying to cast crosswind, it can just be brutal. And like right now we're using forward facing sonar. And so I'm always going into the wind and trying to keep my targets straight head on. And that allows me to use the lightest jig possible versus if I'm trying to sling it out to the side 40, 60 feet, it just looks like a curveball slinging. But even without forward facing sonar, I just start working along the edges of the break and I look at what the wind direction before I pull up to it so that I'm going to be working into the wind as best I can up along that break and pitching and fan casting until I get a bite, and then I'm going to slow down and work that area more thoroughly. These fish are just kind of scattered all over. You'd almost be better off sometimes just fan casting the area. With forward facing sonar, we have a tendency to get what I call screen locked, where you're staring at it and you can't look away. And sometimes people will not even make casts unless they're seeing fish. But you can't see them all, especially if they're tight to bottom, there's rocks, there's weeds. So that's something that I got to work on myself too, is not getting screen locked and still going out fishing, but then still incorporating that tool into the setup. But yeah, just working into the wind. Oh, he dropped it. Oh, let's try this again. A little pot of them just cruising around, and man, these fish are just moving. Like I said, there's tons of them here, but they're not like in big schools. They're pods roaming around. Might be 2 fish, might be 6 fish, might be 1 fish, and they're just scattered along here, cruising around, feeding. I got one all over me right now, just kind of hanging it in the column. He hasn't bit yet, so I'm gonna try a little pop next. See if he wants that. Come on, baby. Letting that shiner do the work. Looks like that time the walleye won, which is kind of why I like walleye fishing so much, because it's a challenge. And there's something special about, man, even just fooling one into biting. It's just rewarding. It can be a 16-inch walleye and you're like, yeah. I need to catch about 48 largemouth bass to have that same feeling, unless it's a 4 or 5 pounder. That's a little different. That's enough bass talk though. Let's get back to walleyes. He bit. And that time I was actually kind of doing little hops, little flutters, and it's just like anything else. You just got to play around with the cadence. Try not to pressure him in. And, you know, sometimes it's the way she goes. Should we see if it'll bite without a minnow? Frick. I was so ready. Oh, it came up and ate my shiner on the screen. We're gonna throw the hair out there. That fish I lost, or maybe it was another one, I just watched him on live come up and eat the shiner that fell off. Right under the trolling motor. That's a kick in the nuts if I've ever seen one. Jeez, man. I can't believe that. I should have just whipped this back out there. I mean, that's the whole point of the hair too, is even if you lose your minnow, it can still get bit. I can't even believe that. Less than 10 feet away and comes up and eats the minnow. All right. I was just going to talk about playing with cadences. Make sure you switch up jig colors. Just right through the snoot. If you go a little too far, you get into that skull. Little farther back and it stays on better, but then the minnow dies quicker. Where if you go just through the lips, or this one's right through the nostril, then that thing will stay alive and do the dancing in the water for you. But you're gonna lose a lot more on cast. Shooting up, bonk. Oh no! I did what you shouldn't do. Not let them just munch it for a second. So when you're pitching minnows, the bigger the minnow, the longer you should wait. But especially cold water, bigger shiners like that. I'm so used to pitching plastics where when you get bit, you set it instantly before they spit it. I just got to remember to just slow your roll a hair when you're pitching bigger minnows. I mean, you don't really have to with fatheads, but anytime the water's colder too, you feel that bite, just give them a 1 Mississippi 2 and then lean into them. And you won't miss as many fish as me. It's so hard not to. Man, even after you've been doing it all day, you just feel that bonk and just that instant reaction of boom, you know? We're gonna put a big dog on for this one. Definitely give him a split second to munch that down before setting the hook. That minnow's gonna feel like a bite. Chewing on it, chewing on it, chewing on it. I gave that one a little bit longer even than I normally would, just because it was a big plush size shiner. But look at that. Let them chew on it for a second and then you don't miss every single fish like me. That's kind of the nice thing too, running a 7.3 medium light fast rod. Great all around walleye rod. But I love that mushy medium light tip, especially for pitching jigs and minnows in cold water where you want to feel it load up a little bit, let them chew for a second, and then crack them. I'm just running 10-pound Sufix Advanced 832 braid with, whoops, missed them, with an 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. I'll even go down to 6 when it's not super windy and I'm fishing edges of weeds and stuff, but with this rock around, got 8-pound on there. Yeah, just about an 8-foot fluorocarbon leader, pitching jigs, catching a whole bunch of fish. But just remember, I know jigs and minnows have been around forever, but with everybody talking plastics all the time, and there's still a time and a place to bust out the shiner, especially during cold fronts, fussy fish, or if you just feel like catching a pile of fish, man.